Your homework for tonight is you're going to put 2 of your patterns onto fashion illustrations. For the final, you're going to have each of your patterns onto fashion illustrations or fashion photographs. And for tonight, you're supposed to do one of each. You're supposed to texture map the pattern onto the photograph and create a texture mapped fashion sketch. So you're going to texture map the pattern onto a sketch. And you should do this kind of with 2 out of your 4 patterns that you have done. And then we're also supposed to talk about making fashion flats in Illustrator. But I guess we could go over how to do this in Photoshop. So if you had a scanned flat, which I can download really quick, so I'll just grab this one. We can go over how I would fill this with pattern in Photoshop. So we're mostly going to be in Photoshop, but I did want to show you the pattern itself in Illustrator. So I image traced a photograph of some daisies that was I took a picture at my brother's house. And then I actually made a transparent pattern. So this doesn't have a background. If I moved this, you would be able to see whatever background was behind it through it. And on my little artboard, which is isolating my single repeat, I gave this a background. So sometimes I work a little bit differently than the really rigid ways that I have enforced upon you guys, right? So when we check on this pattern, we will see that it is 452 points by 234 points. So I probably wrote that down. And then I made an artboard that was the exact size of that. So it's 452 by 234. And I just filled that artboard with the pattern. So that's one of the most straightforward ways to get this single tile out of Illustrator, right? So this is a single tile, and we know that because if we repeat it to the left and right, it lines up seamlessly across the repeat, obviously with no blue background in there. That's added manually with a square. So this does look like it's going off the edge, which is a little concerning, but it should be fine. And actually, as we zoom in, we see that it's not actually going off the edge. It was just kind of rendering that as we were zoomed out for some reason. So I have already exported this artboard as a JPEG, and this JPEG would be able to be uploaded to Spoonflower like we learned about 2 weeks ago now. It would make a perfect seamless repeat in Spoonflower, but it's also a nice way to get things into Photoshop. So if we open this up in Photoshop, can I just drag it in there? Yes, I can. We can go then to edit define pattern. So we already know this is seamless, so we don't have to go through any kind of, you know, how I've done like filter other offset to make seamless textural patterns in Photoshop. We don't need to do that. It's already seamless, so we can just go to edit define pattern, and there it is. So now I am going to open up the illustration. I want it in a new page, so get out of here. Okay, so image rotation is a nice way to flip the whole artboard 180 degrees. And I'm going to grab my crop tool and crop the artboard down to size. Like this. And I am going to approach this in a similar way to how I would approach texture mapping a photograph like we've done as an in-class activity, where I prefer, my favorite way to do it is to break her down into different sections with color blocking. So I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to call it color blocking. And I'm going to start filling this layer with a bunch of different little sections. So I'm just going to start clicking around her. I only need to address her dress. I like to use the polygonal lasso tool, especially on like graphite drawings, because the magnetic lasso tool probably wouldn't be able to latch on to areas like over here where I haven't drawn a hard line around my illustration. So I generally like to start by tracing or clicking, selecting around the whole garment, and then I like to break it up further, but of course there's more than one way to skin a cat here. So if you wanted to, you could just be like selecting around the hood and filling in the hood. Damn, I have anti-alias checked up here, and I really don't want that. So I am actually going to deselect and uncheck anti-alias. We're going to try to do this right, where we won't get any lines, because last time when we all did this for homework or for an in-class activity, we all ended up with lines, right during our big digital prints. That's when we had to do it. So using your own illustration is really nice because you can choose from, any style of garment because you're drawing it yourself. And you know that you'll have enough pixels. I took this picture with my phone, but we could also go over how to scan. Have you guys ever used the scanner? Do you want to learn how to use the scanner? No. I feel like using your phone works just as well, except that the lighting will be a little funky. Like you can tell that on the bottom of my screen here, it's like a little bit darker, but I generally just adjust that kind of thing with the dodge tool or the burn tool, depending on what I want. Okay, so Alt removes sections, right? And I don't want this area in between her arm and her body to have pattern on it. And now I'm going to fill this with the paint bucket tool, but again, with the paint bucket tool, I really want to make sure that anti-alias is unchecked. It will pretty much always automatically check it, and we want it unchecked. And I can fill, this color is arbitrary. We're filling it with this color as a way to save our selections. This is why we do the color blocking. Obviously, if you follow someone else's instructions, they're going to show you a totally different way to do it. I've even tried to show you how to use save selection, but I think it's just more visually straightforward to like block all the colors out and all your selections out here. And then you can just grab the magic wand tool and select, and we would have this whole thing selected again. So right now it's kind of useless because I can't see through this, so I'm going to lower the opacity. So now we can see through it, and we can continue to start selecting. And now, because I've already selected the whole garment, I don't have to worry about the outside edges at all. So if I just select like along the interior lines, the interior edges where I want to split things up, I can easily just fill with a different color. And it's only, the paint bucket tool is only going to fill up to the edge. Right, so we're using the qualities of the paint bucket tool, which only allow it to fill you know, of the same exact color and that kind of thing, in order to allow us to get these separate sections while we don't have to reselect the outside of the arm every time we're doing this, because the paint bucket tool will fill only the arm. I hope I'm kind of making sense. Oops. Ugh. You just have to make sure you're on the proper layer, so you're on your color blocking layer. If we were filling onto our background layer, things get really annoying. So we're just going to keep it all on the color blocking layer, and I probably am just going to do this other arm. I'm just going to kind of fudge a seam since I didn't draw one. And we'll fill that with a different color. And honestly, we should probably, because there's such a dramatic bend in her arm, make this section also a different color just to save time later. It really shouldn't make too much of a difference. We could always select things out as we go. So now I've got a color blocking layer, and again, the benefit of the color blocking layer is that as long as I'm on the color blocking layer, I can grab my magic wand tool and I will have instantly selected, as long as my tolerance is on 0, I will have, oh, it's got sample all layers checked off, so we want to uncheck that. And now it is selecting only on my color blocking layer, but it's selecting all of these selections instantly, which I find to be kind of the fastest way to do this thing. So, so it was on sample all layers where it was like selecting, you know, from the painting underneath, and we don't want that, yeah. In the options panel, so if you're working on, oh no, this is the only layout Photoshop has, so it's always going to be here. Yeah, so now I'm going to fill with this pattern. So we've already defined it using edit define pattern, right? And now I'm going to go to layer, new fill layer pattern. This is one way to, you know, there's many ways to do this. And it doesn't look seamless. I wonder if this is a half drop and I didn't realize. If we go to edit fill, I can check at least if it was. It does let you choose from a brick fill. It does seem like, nope, it was, oh no, that would have been a half drop. Sorry, I'm gonna go back to Illustrator and check really quick. Sorry. Oh yeah, it's a brick by column. Or at least that one is. That one's funky. So to define this as a brick by column, I need to, of course, I could just like export an artboard sized image of this to like a JPEG from Illustrator. That's an option, but I can define this as a half drop. I just need to make my my canvas twice as big. So let's do it this way. Image, canvas size, 6.28. Sometimes you can type in math into these boxes. Oh, it worked. So that's great. So I just typed in, you know, *2 for ×2, and it did multiply the width correctly. And now I just need to, I should probably have made this into its own layer first, and then it will add transparent in the background instead of, it had just added white to the edge of my image, which would have been a little bit more annoying. So I can type in *2 in here, and it does that math automatically. And now I just need to slide this one all the way over to the left and duplicate the layer. And we're going to slide this one until it lines up halfway and duplicate the layer. Come on. Oh, yeah. And this one gets lined up at the top. So now I have made a straight repeat. So now when we go to edit, define pattern, it will work in Photoshop. So now we can choose layer, new fill layer, pattern, and we can choose from this daisy. And I'm going to take the liberty of making it a little bit smaller. So 75%. Looks good. Those will still be pretty big flowers. So this layer is going to be the layer that I copy and paste from, so I need to rasterize it. If I tried to copy right now, it might tell me that there's nothing to copy. It might just do nothing. It did nothing. So we instead are going to right-click on it and choose Rasterize Layer. Rasterizing the layer, it makes it pixels, right? Yeah, right. Before it was like a pattern layer, which had like that pattern repeated throughout it. Now it's just a layer of pixels. And I am going to grab a section that's like just a little bit bigger than the main body of my dress and copy and paste that from the pattern fill layer. So now we have a little section that's just about that big, and we are going to make a clipping mask for it using our color blocking kind of selection. So I'm going to grab the magic wand tool, I'm going to make sure I'm on my color blocking layer, and I'm going to click on the dress. So now we instantly have that dress selected, and back on my pattern layer, we're going to click on this little circle inside a rectangle. That's the layer mask tool. And it's automatically made into a layer mask. So if we wanted to, we could take a second now to play with the opacity settings and kind of try to figure out what's going to look good on here. Almost definitely we're going to use multiply because that looks awesome. But it doesn't hurt just to kind of scroll through these. You can do this so easily in Photoshop, but we'll stick with multiply. And what we can do is we can also warp this. So it's not super necessary on a pattern like this where there isn't straight lines, but it can help to kind of show that the pattern is being warped. So I am going to make sure that my layers are not linked. If I try to warp this right now, it's going to warp both the layer and its layer mask, which isn't what we want. We want the layer mask to stay the same and just to adjust the pattern underneath it. So we we click on this little link, and now they shouldn't move together anymore. And we can double check that because if we click and drag on this, it should move without its layer mask, right? We would even be able to move it like way over there. So unlink it, and we can go to Edit, Transform, Warp, and we can manipulate the pattern in here. And I generally like to I try to bring the sides of the pattern in so they look like they're kind of getting smaller as they move away from your eye. And sometimes it's more effective than others. So that's an option. We can also use something called liquify, which I don't know if I've even mentioned liquify before. So where there's this like, oh no, actually this is a good spot for it. She has a wrinkle in her garment here, and the pattern would be kind of significantly kind of chunked away by that. So we can turn that back on, and we're going to go to Filter, Liquify. And it's kind of, they don't make it easy to use this tool because they don't like to show you the other layers at the same time. It won't work if all your layers in here, I'm in this like show backdrop section. It won't work if all your layers are at 100% opacity, but you can kind of work with it at a high opacity so we can still see things. Now I am on, all your tools are over here in Liquify, and you can do a variety of things like twist the artwork and pucker the artwork and bloat the artwork. But I am just going to use the forward warp tool, which is kind of just like finger painting through your artwork. So I'm going to lower the size to something appropriate. That's way too small. But something like this size, right? And we can kind of just see the wrinkle here. And it doesn't like my backdrop settings. Oh yeah, that is warping stuff actually. So I'm just adding, I'm actually going to use the reconstruct tool to start over there. Which just puts it back to normal. And then I'm going to go back to this tool, and it was just that my pressure was too high, and I'm just giving it a little bit of a warp there. My pressure was really low, so it wasn't doing anything, and I think it prefers when you only choose one background layer to show while you're working. And obviously I'm even doing it like really, really low. Yeah, so we could even increase the size and give these little moments here. But again, you would want to, make sure it was right for the situation. We can hit OK, and we can see we did add like a little wrinkle there and some movements in these. So liquify is an option. It just wants you to have maybe only one background layer showing. Let's keep moving forward. I'm going to go back to my pattern fill layer and just grab a little square that's a little bit bigger than my hood area, and I'm going to grab it from a different section so that it definitely won't line up, and just copy and paste that. I'm going to line this over the hood. Even though my color blocking layer is off, even though it's not visible, I can still grab my magic wand tool, and as long as it's selected and not visible, I can click where I know I want to select, and it will still select even though it's not visible. And we can make a layer mask on that layer. Oops, on this layer. And change it to multiply. This has a seam down the center of the hood that I would probably address and make it look like it had actually gotten a seam there. I would probably do that by duplicating this layer and just releasing the clipping mask so I can drag that clipping mask to the trash. And I would just rotate this a little bit. So what I'm hoping is that things will still kind of line up on the top where there is no seam, but on the bottom where there is a seam, things will get kind of a little bit jarred. So I'm just going to select down half of this. If I have it selected already, I can just hold Alt and deselect. Alt, I was holding Option. And we can create a layer mask on my other half. So I'm just going to apply half of the hood clipping mask to the other side too. Because it's overlapping now and because they're transparent, we are able to see that. But I can use my layer masks to add and subtract from the selection. So I have the whole hood selection made, and I can right-click on the layer mask for just the right half of the selection. I then can choose Subtract Mask. So you can use layer masks as ways of saving your selections as well. It's just not the most versatile way of doing it. Here we go. And again, I could do any kind of warping or liquifying there. So this is just like putting it on a photograph. I guess I can keep going. How are you guys feeling about this? Do you have questions on texture mapping? Cool. So I guess I don't need to finish this whole thing. I actually have the finished product posted on my Instagram. I might have even shown it to you before. Oh, she's not here. I don't know what happened. Oh no, this is her. It's just that it looks like a photograph from a distance. So that's where you could end up if you were dedicated enough. And I also digitally colored my illustration, which is a similar process. I will still color block when I am digitally painting. So with my color blocking layer, if I was going to color her sleeves in yellow or something, I would just have the sleeves selected, make a new layer, and then I would probably instantly throw a layer mask layer on it, because when you grab the pen, the brush tool, or whatever you're going to use to color it in, let's come on. That's weird. Why? I don't know why it's forcing me to be in grayscale. I don't know what. It's so annoying. It should instantly color block. I don't know why it's allowing me. Oh, I had a weird selection going on. There. We will select the arm, make the layer mask, and then draw with the brush. And what it does, okay. Just make sure you're drawing with the brush on the correct layer. What it does is it makes sure that it's all clipped to the brush, which is nice. You can just choose multiply. So you can also digitally color your illustrations, which I think is a nice option. So we can also apply our repeats to flats. Actually, before I move on from this, I want to clean up the bottom and the top are like a little bit darker than the middle. So I'm going to double click on the background layer so it's editable. Otherwise it would give me an error message, and I'm going to grab the dodge tool, which lightens. And I always, when I'm doing this kind of thing, I make the cursor huge, so that's a good size, honestly, but maybe even a little bit bigger. And I make sure that I'm on a super soft brush because I don't want to have a hard line of brightness through here. And I just take as many, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 swipes across the bottom, and we can just brighten that up until it looks like the rest of the page. Same on the top. And you don't want to go crazy because you can obviously lose some of the detail in your drawing otherwise. So we're going to do the same thing when we open up our hand-drawn flats. Um, image, canvas, image rotation, counterclockwise. I would probably break this down into color blocks. I probably would never color a flat in Photoshop, but it's totally an acceptable way to do this project. We can select around an area. And I would, again, I would probably take my time and make a new layer and color block out all these sections with, arbitrary colors that make it easy to select again. But I can also just go to layer, new fill layer, pattern, and because I had that selected already, it automatically filled that little section with it. And let's make it at least 75, maybe 50. And then we can just play with the opacity settings. You probably shouldn't do any warping or anything on flats because they're supposed to be so inherently flat. What would be good is making sure that it doesn't look seamless, right? So it wouldn't line up perfectly across the armpit. So if I did choose a different section here, I'm going to do it super quick. And if we did fill this and make it 50. We see how it is seamless across this armpit. We would probably want to at least move it so that those don't line up. And that's what I would focus on in terms of flats. So you can also obviously make flats in Illustrator, and this is what the whole next class is going to be about, really. Next semester, not next week. But if you take this again, if you take the next digital tools class with me, we will be spending the whole time making flats. But when you're learning how to draw flats, tracing them can be a really good option. You are supposed to make a flat today for homework. You are welcome to apply it in Photoshop using the same techniques that we applied the patterns to our illustrations, but you could also trace in Illustrator. So I'm going to put this on its own layer and lock my first layer. So now it's just a tracing template. I can even double click on the layer and check off template, which will automatically dim it, which is nice. And then on layer 2, I could start tracing around this. What I would be concerned about is making closed shapes. So anywhere where you want to have the pattern applied, we would need a closed shape. And there's lots of techniques for getting this appropriately, but one way is to just utilize Illustrator's kind of inherent stacking capabilities. So if I draw this outside shape first, and it has the exact right lines, then my next shape, I would want to make sure it went underneath this shape. So I can start drawing around the outside, but then I don't need to be neat on that on the other side because I'm going to send this to the back. Right click, arrange, send to back. And now those are the correct seams. And we would be able to bring in my pattern. So if you copy and paste something from a file that has a pattern onto it into another file, it will automatically add this pattern to your swatches, and you don't even have to, you can just delete the shape afterwards and the pattern stays there. So that's the idea anyway. This is how you could accomplish this. So I could keep going, and I would just want to, I could even choose to draw behind, which is an option over here that I don't use very often. But if I grab draw behind, if I have that selected, then I can just draw, and no matter what I do on the sides that don't overlap, those are going to be behind. It's behind this one but not this one. I guess I'm not sure why it doesn't go all the way behind. I would also want to define this with a background in the pattern. So this pattern is too big right now, and you can scale patterns down by right-clicking and choosing Transform and Scale, and then you uncheck Transform Objects. So I would want to make sure that the stroke around the outside of all of these pieces was uniform. So I could keep going here and do the whole garment, but when you're ready to do stitch lines, I guess we can talk about making a dashed line really quick. I can even copy and paste line segments. Copying and pasting with the white selection tool only copies the line segments to the left and right of the anchor point you have selected. Or if you just have a line segment selected, they'll just copy that line segment. But if you have an anchor point selected, it copies both sides. So I can copy and paste that little segment, and then I just need to make sure it has no fill on it. And then I can come over to my stroke panel, which, just like anything, if you can't see a window that I have open or a panel that I have open, you can go to Window, and then in this case you would go to Stroke, and we can check off Dashed Line, and you just have to adjust the amount of space in between the dashes and the gaps, and a 2-point dash and a 2-point gap is normally what we do. And then we generally also give it a rounded cap. So right now it's a square cap, which looks fine, but if we click off rounded, it gives us this nice polished stitch look. So that's how you can add top stitching if you so chose. Doing a zipper is a lot more complicated. That's going to be, for next year. But this is an option. Tracing flats in Illustrator, tracing hand-drawn flats. This is how my graduate school teaches how to make flats, tracing hand-drawn ones. I think it's a lot more straightforward to just draw them in Illustrator now that I'm that good at Illustrator. But when you're beginning, it makes sense to do some tracing of flats. So this is an option, but I'm going to say that you can either produce your flats tonight in Illustrator, or you can produce it in Photoshop with this texture mapping, right? I can also brighten up this page using Dodge, which is nice. So, can I review anything from today's lecture for you guys? Okay, so for homework, just to say it again, and I will probably say it again before the end of class, you're going to do all three of the techniques that we've learned. You're going to make a flat, and you're going to fill it with pattern, whether you're doing that in Illustrator or Photoshop, no big deal. You're going to texture map a pattern on a photograph. This is, for practice, really, and then you're going to texture map on a fashion sketch. So these two, at least, are definitely for your final. I think that the fashion flat is more just practice, but if you did do well enough, it could definitely be part of your final. So if you wanted to have 3 different types, like for your 3 different patterns, I think that would be fine. Does the homework make sense?
Yes.
Okay. You should also. Oh, it seems like I was insisting on like a big review, at least last year. I would say that, yeah, okay. We only have a few more classes here, especially with Thanksgiving. We have 1 more class before Thanksgiving. So for next class, you probably have this stuff, but you should bring all your digital files to class to review. You probably do anyway, but it seems like we will have some work time next class where you and I could be talking about how to improve your patterns and stuff, which we might be doing that today. All right, so let's take a break until 10:30, and then I think I'll have like individual meetings with you guys about how you're doing so far, and then we'll have work time for you to start on this homework. I'm sure you'll have questions on texture mapping, having only done it a couple times, so it would be good to get started in class. Cool. Let me stop this recording. Bye, Snaggets.